Christopher Newson was born on September 21, 1983, in the American city of Knoxville, Tennessee, to married couple Hugh and Mary Newson. He was given his father's name, but as time went on, those close to him began to call him Christopher. He was an ordinary boy who got his elementary education without much difficulty and moved on to Halls High School as a teenager. There, he became a member of the Red Devils baseball team, demonstrating extraordinary abilities as well as a great ability to interact with other players. In 2002, Christopher enrolled at Pisby State Community College and became a carpenter. A short time later, he met Shannon Christian, a beautiful young woman who charmed him at first sight. Shannon was born on April 29, 1985, in Nacogdoches, Texas. Once upon a time, her parents Dina and Gary faced the hard news that they would never have children. However, against all predictions, Dina managed to get pregnant. A boy was born and named Chase. The couple considered his birth a real miracle. When the second pregnancy came, the joy of the young parents was not limited. They were finally the perfect family, the kind of family they had always wanted to be. Little Shannon was a charming girl with big blue eyes. However, she never abused her beauty and was characterized by a noble character. Harmony reigned in the family. The friendship between brother and sister was unusually strong. In 1997, the Christian family moved to Tennessee. In 2003, Shannon successfully graduated from Farragut High School, after which she entered the Department of Sociology at the University of Tennessee in Snowville. Around this time, the girl began actively supporting her brother Chase, watching his baseball games and traveling all over the country with him. They were called inseparable. Even though both were still living with their parents, they wanted something more and boldly made plans for the future. Dina later said she was aware of her daughter's crush on Christopher, and the feeling was mutual. In the same town of Snowville lived a man named Lemaricus Duvall Davidson, originally from Memphis, where he was born on June 13, 1981. His childhood and teenage years were a real nightmare, as his mother suffered from severe drug addiction and his father abused alcohol. Lemaricus also had a half-brother, Lemaricus. At the age of 16, the boy had an opportunity to change his life. He, without hesitation, chose the criminal path, which soon brought him to prison. The same fate befell his brother. In 2003, Lemaricus was convicted of attempted robbery in the third degree. After serving 5 years for robbery with violence, Lemaricus was released on August 5, 2006, and went straight to Snowville. There, he rented a place in a dilapidated house in the city's industrial district, and, instead of getting on the straight and narrow, began dealing illegal substances. After meeting a girl named Di Sutton, whose life also revolved around drugs, Lemaricus had an affair with her. Trying to reconnect after a 5-year separation, he tried to find his half-brother. At the time, Lemaricus was living in Kentucky and dating Vanessa Coleman. His activities also involved dealing in illegal substances. Since the brothers had not seen each other since childhood and New Year's Eve was approaching, Lemaricus decided to visit Lemaricus and traveled with Vanessa and friend George Giovanni Thomas. They arrived in Knoxville in early January 2007. On January 5th, Lemaricus and Di had a serious argument. The conflict ended with the man hitting his girlfriend. The next day, Di decided to leave and asked to stay with her pal Cassis. Fate alone knows why people with such stony hearts should have gotten in the way of a young couple in love who were the complete opposite of them. But it was this meeting that took place on the first Saturday in January. Shannon and Christopher planned to have dinner together and then go to a party. The girl stopped by her friend's house to help her with makeup, hairstyling, and choosing a nice outfit. At about 8 p.m., they parted ways and Shannon started waiting for her boyfriend who was supposed to pick her up in another part of town. At this point, Lemaricus, who already had a sinister plan in his head, showed up at his brother's house and asked him to go with him, but at first said nothing about the purpose of the trip. On the road, they consumed drugs, after which they got to talking. At this time, they were joined by Eric Dwayne, an acquaintance of Lemaricus, completing a deadly trio that was ready for the worst. Around midnight, Christopher and Shannon drove down to the parking lot of the apartment complex. The girl got behind the wheel of her Toyota pickup truck, and Christopher bent down beside her, holding the door open. Full of passion, they merged in a kiss. At the same second, armed thugs who had appeared out of nowhere pounced on them. They were Lemaricus, Latalis, and Eric. The criminals forced the terrified lovers into the back seat of Shannon's car, tied their hands behind their backs, and drove them to a rented house. It was later revealed that at this point, Eric withdrew from the gang. The next morning, January 7th, Shannon's mother, Dina, woke up with a bad feeling. Her daughter had not returned home and was not answering her cell phone. Concerns were heightened when the girl's best friend called to report that the couple had not shown up at a party. Dina immediately contacted emergency services. That same night, Lemaricus arrived at Vanessa's friend Daphne's house in Shannon's car and Christopher's sneakers, which were clearly too small for him. Daphne noticed this, as well as the unfamiliar car. She asked the guy to take her to the house she'd lived in with him before to pick up the things that were left there, particularly her clothes and makeup. As soon as they arrived at the place, Daphne saw Latalis and George Thomas. They warned the girl that Vanessa was in the bathroom right now, so there would be no way to retrieve her things. She was prevented from going into the kitchen and bedroom, where Latalis was holding Shannon at that moment. Daphne soon left. Because the kidnapping victims were adults, authorities stood idle for 24 hours, as was common in missing persons cases at the time. Without waiting for help, the families of the young people went on their own to search for their children. Meanwhile, Shannon and Christopher, captured by sadists, had a real nightmare. After they were subjected to all kinds of torture, the boy was brought to the railroad tracks. He was dressed in a shirt and underwear. He was forced to walk barefoot, blindfolded, with his hands bound and his mouth gagged. At one point, deafening gunshots rang out. Bullets hit Christopher in the neck and back. He did not die immediately, but the third shot, in the head, proved fatal. The killers then doused him with gasoline and set him on fire. Back at the house, they went after Shannon. Sexual abuse committed against her was characterized by unprecedented cruelty and lasted for several hours. She was then tied up, placed in a garbage bag, and covered with sheets. The girl died an agonizing death and soon died from lack of oxygen. On January 8th, the still smoking body of a man was found near the railroad tracks. Forensics confirmed that it was Christopher's. Investigators, who had to inform his mother Mary, had to warn her that the sight of the dead man would be too gruesome. However, the woman insisted on coming to the identification. Already in the morgue, Mary put her hand on the body bag and whispered to her son that she would not say goodbye because she knew that someday they would meet again. Meanwhile, the criminals had left the rented house. Lemaricus decided to spend a few nights at Daphne's house. He told her that his brother had suddenly disappeared with the keys to the apartment, so it was impossible to get in. Daphne doubted the veracity of his words, but eventually believed him. The other participants in the crime, Latalis, Vanessa, and George, returned to Kentucky. Vanessa made several entries in her personal journal about how exciting her life had been and how many new things she had learned recently. Police continued to investigate. On January 8th, Shannon's car was found. It was thoroughly inspected, and the first thing that caught the investigators' eye was that the floor was covered with dirt. The girl's relatives called it unusual. In addition, a pack of cigarettes was found in the cabin, although neither Shannon nor Christopher smoked. Finally, agents came across an envelope, and after it was examined for fingerprints, the result led to Lemaricus. Since the suspect had been involved in multiple crimes and had a criminal record, detectives had no trouble finding out where he lived. On January 9th, a team of police officers visited the ill-fated rental home. What they saw inside shocked them. The body of a breathless Shannon was sent for examination. The expertise of the county's forensic medical examiner, Dr. Darinka Milna-Pochin, allowed her to say with certainty that both victims had suffered terrible agony. A caustic chemical was found in Shannon's throat as well as on her body, and even in the area of her scarred genitals. The girl was tortured while she was still alive. The gruesome news hit the TV newscasts, so Daphne soon learned about what had happened, and the first thing she did was to meet Lemaricus. Afterwards, he escaped, and took refuge in an abandoned house. In doing so, he made the mistake of calling Eric. The call was immediately picked up by the agents. At the same time, they managed to find Daphne and persuade her to cooperate with the investigation. During the first interrogation, the frightened girl told everything she knew and added that Lemaricus begged her to believe him, claiming that he was innocent of anything. The detective's next step was to investigate the crime scene. All of the work was videotaped. The camera captured the mess in the apartment. In addition to the shell casings, which could become important evidence, specialists found video recordings, as well as Christopher's shoes, binoculars, and an unloaded revolver caliber .22, matching the caliber of the weapon that killed the young man. The case attracted not only statewide attention, people outside the state also learned what had happened. Federal agents joined the investigation. Important information emerged regarding the video found in the house. It became known that it had been rented from a library in Kentucky by George Thomas. Thus, the name of another gang member surfaced. The police, meanwhile, were looking for a suitable way to approach Lemaricus and decided to start with Eric. It wasn't hard to get information on the guy's whereabouts, and literally within hours, Eric was located and arrested. His attempt to avoid justice and blame others for everything collapsed under the weight of convincing evidence of his involvement in what he had done. On the same day, Vanessa and George were caught. Raising public and press attention while waiting for the investigation to develop, the Shannon family issued a public address on January 12, 2007, thanking everyone for their help in finding the couple and their prayers. Funeral arrangements were also made for Christopher, but due to the condition of his body, the family was unable to have a public ceremony. Realizing that there was overwhelming evidence, each of the 5 suspects told their version of events, trying to pin the blame on the others. However, they all agreed that the original motive for the attack on the couple was to steal a car. And Tennessee's felony statute presupposed liability not only for committing a crime, but also for knowing about it and failing to act to prevent it. With the exception of Eric, the other suspects admitted to being in the rented house. The question arose as to whether Vanessa voluntarily participated in the violence or was held against her will. Initially, the girl was treated as a witness and even placed in protective custody. But after numerous interrogations, she finally confessed that she had taken a direct part in the attack. On January 25, 2007, a memorial service was held on the university campus in Shannon's memory. A year later, a golf tournament was organized and a memorial fund was established. A second initiative was to begin offering scholarships to final-year students at Farragut High School, where Shannon attended. As for Christopher, Pisby College honored his memory with a minor league baseball tournament, and since 2009, Halls High School has awarded the Christopher Memorial Scholarship to the most outstanding baseball player each year. Participants in the events were introduced before a Knox County jury. Lemaricus, George, Latalis, and Vanessa were indicted on felony charges, although they were originally expected to be tried at separate trials scheduled from May through August 2008. Eric was indicted on federal charges in U.S. District Court as an accomplice to assisting the suspects in evading police. On April 16, 2008, he was found guilty of all charges, including theft and concealing the whereabouts of a fleeing felon. The man received the maximum sentence of 18 years in prison. George's attorneys filed a motion for a speedy trial, arguing that there was no connection between their client and the crime scene. The motion was granted, and the trial was set for August 11, 2008, but then rescheduled for 2009. At that time, County Attorney Randy Nichols announced that if convicted, the state would be forced to impose the death penalty for Latalis and Vanessa. However, the trial was put on hold, and both their trials and George's trial were postponed. Because of the press's incessant poring over the details of the crimes committed, the defense began to argue that a change of venue was necessary to ensure a fair trial. However, this ploy proved unsuccessful, and Knox County Criminal Court Judge Richard Wagner denied the attorney's motion. He subsequently formed a new jury in Nashville. In October 2008, a rented house stained with the blood of the unfortunate victims was bought by a company and almost immediately demolished. The new owners of the property planned to build a memorial in honor of Shannon and Christopher. At the end of August the following year, Lemaricus was due in court. In his testimony, he admitted that he had lied several times during interrogations, but now that he was under oath in court, he would allegedly tell only the truth. The jury deliberated for about 10 hours on the first day, and the decision was announced the next morning. Lemaricus was found guilty of both murders, but acquitted on the sexual assault charges. On August 26, 2009, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. 2 months later, Lemaricus also went on trial. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence against him was the report of the medical examiner who performed the autopsies on the bodies. Dr. Darinka's account was not easy for those present, as she detailed the serious injuries sustained by the victims. Clothing, including jeans with DNA traces, served as evidence of violence against Shannon. The truly shocking moment for everyone was when the autopsy photos were shown. When the pictures were shown on the screen, the assistant prosecutor fainted. This necessitated a short recess, and although the assistant was unable to return to the room, Judge Richard announced that anyone who cried would be escorted out of the room. The jury deliberated the case for only 4 hours and found many new aggravating circumstances, including the use of various means to inflict pain on the victims, which outweighed the mitigating circumstances noted by the defense attorneys. Lemaricus was found guilty of murder, especially felony robbery and especially felony murder. He was also found guilty of participating in the sexual assault of Christopher and the assault of Shannon. The sentencing hearing began at 9 a.m. on October 29, 2009, and was expected to last until Friday. Prosecutors, hoping for the death penalty, called relatives of the victims to the witness stand to testify and express their emotions. Chase told how much his sister meant to him. Dina told the audience about Shannon in a calm and firm voice so that everyone in the room could understand the immense grief of losing her daughter. The defense had hoped Lemaricus would receive a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 51 years, or life without parole. But on the morning of October 30, prosecutor Takesha Fitzgerald noted that there was no excuse for the felon's actions. Jurors later announced their unanimous decision. When their foreman said they were requesting the death penalty for Lemaricus, there was a loud outcry in the courtroom. The decision was based on 4 charges, including 4 death sentences, 2 counts of felony murder, and 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder. According to Judge Richard, this was one of the most incredibly heinous, cruel, and inhumane cases he has ever encountered. In his opinion, there is no punishment sufficient for the murders committed. Richard concluded his speech by telling Lemaricus that the state had given him the death penalty by lethal injection. To ensure the safety of the jurors, they were given extra security after the session. In subsequent statements, Dina expressed that she and her family were pleased with the verdict, emphasizing that justice had been served. Hugh, Christopher's father, expressed a desire for other trials to end in the same way. Meanwhile, the media continued to write about the events that had taken place. Hypotheses began to be born, stirring up new passions. It was believed that these were racially motivated hate crimes because Shannon and Christopher were white and their attackers were dark-skinned. This led to white nationalists organizing a rally in Snowville. In turn, another group showed up to protest against the nationalists. In a situation that threatened to disrupt public order, prosecutors issued a statement that there was no connection between the events and the race of the victims because it started with a carjacking. The families of Shannon and Christopher confirmed that they had nothing to do with the rally or its organizers. On December 8, 2009, George was found guilty of all charges, including those for which other defendants were acquitted. Despite the fact that his case was built solely on circumstantial evidence and testimony, his sentencing hearing was held the same day and continued until December 10th. The jury deliberation lasted about 3 hours, and the final verdict was life in prison without parole for each of the 4 felonies, 2 counts of capital murder and 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder. Vanessa's case was a real legal challenge. Although federal authorities had granted her immunity for the express purpose of making her a key witness in a federal auto theft case, the state courts had made no agreements with the girl and had no intention of releasing her. They decided that federal immunity did not extend to state charges of murder and sexual assault. On May 13, 2010, Vanessa was acquitted of first-degree murder and found not guilty of the crimes committed against Christopher, but she did not go unpunished. The girl was found guilty of 17 other charges, including contributing to the kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder, all crimes committed against Shannon. On July 30, 2010, she was sentenced to 53 years in prison. However, that wasn't the end of it. 4 years later, when it seemed that the victims' families were slowly coming to terms with their experiences, a stunning turn of events cast doubt on the objectivity of the trial that had been conducted. In January 2011, Judge Richard announced that he was a drug addict. As a result of this admission, he left office. The state Supreme Court upheld the sentences of Lemaricus and Latalis and scheduled new hearings in the cases of George and Vanessa. At the second trial, Vanessa's diary became a key piece of evidence used by prosecutors Letland Price and Takesha. They were trying to prove the girl's guilt for the crimes committed that night, and their hypothesis was supported by the statements Vanessa had handwritten in her diary on the very days when Shannon and Christopher were taken from her life. All of this cast serious doubt on her claims of innocence. Nevertheless, 18-year-old Vanessa continued to claim that she accidentally ended up in that house and became a hostage to the situation. Her attorney, Ted Lavitt, argued that she wrote those aimless comments in an attempt to trick Latalis into believing that the torture and murder of young people didn't actually outrage her in the slightest. Ted told the jury that Latalis attacked Vanessa when she wanted to leave Lemaricus's house, and that Lemaricus threatened to kill her when she said she would go for help. On February 1, 2013, Judge John Carey Blackhood sentenced the girl to 35 years in prison. During sentencing, the judge did not hesitate, calling the case the most complex and horrific case he has ever handled. George's new trial ended with a guilty verdict on 38 charges. The jury again demanded a life sentence, but with the possibility of parole after 51 years. A couple weeks later, Superior Court Judge Walter Kurtz, upholding the jury's decision, sentenced George to 2 consecutive life sentences for the murders and 25 years for sexual abuse. While Christopher's parents were pleased that the perpetrators did not go unpunished, they still had no intention of bringing Eric to justice as well. The couple did everything to reach George, and finally, 11 years after the tragic events, the man told everything about his accomplice in several crimes. Thus, on August 13, 2018, Eric was found guilty of 36 charges of murder and violation of privacy. He was given 2 life sentences plus another 90 years in prison. That same year, 2018, 69-year-old Judge Richard passed away. Each year, Shannon and Christopher's families hold a memorial ride in honor of the fallen loving couple. In 2022, dozens of cyclists joined the route through the streets of Snowville. This simple gesture was a sign of respect for grieving relatives, as people used it to let people know they remember, love, and appreciate the unfortunate victims of violent criminals. The organizers of the event said they plan to continue the bike ride every year to draw everyone's attention to what happened. We would like to believe that this tragic incident, which claimed the lives of young people, will become an important lesson for someone,